Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to have a few people filtering in over the next few minutes, so we'll kind of take it slow here. But just as we get started, my name is Jordan, and on behalf of the Dallas Public Library, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We learned some great stuff about irrigation and conservation, and hopefully walk away with some tips for our own personal gardens. So before we hand it off, I just have a couple of housekeeping things as usual. One is to note that participants will be muted for this program so that we can keep our focus on the awesome materials that our presenters are going to be sharing with us. So if you do have any questions, we'll be taking those throughout the program. You can put them in the chat box and we'll relay them at the appropriate time. The other thing to note is that we are recording this meeting. You probably saw a pop-up when you joined. We are recording this and streaming it to YouTube. So if you don't want your likeness represented on either of those platforms, you just go ahead and deactivate your video feed. With that, I just want to say thanks again for coming. Before I pass it off to Judy, who's going to talk to us about an awesome event we're having next week about environmental topics. Judy?
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan. Yes, I'm so excited to be here today and thank all of you for joining us for this session. My name is Judy Schmidt and I work for the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability. It's a department within the city of Dallas, and you've probably heard this before, but we're one of about 45 departments. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager, and I'm also the team lead for the outreach within the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability. Before I get started, I want to mention that at the end of the session, I will remind you again, but we do have a thank you gift that we'd be happy to send you. And how you get that is just by emailing us at greendallas@dallascityhall.com. And also, we always invite you to stay tuned for things that are going on with the team and with the city, everything environmental at greendallas.net. So with that, I want to talk about an event that's coming up, and as Jordan mentioned, and let me get, all right. And so one of the many things that we do here at the City of Dallas in our department is we are managing the first Environmental Climate Action Plan, the CCAP. It's a very exciting milestone for the city. It's the first one that Dallas has ever had. And we're an inland city, so it makes it even more impressive, really, that we are taking a serious look at this. So it is a historic plan for us, and it was approved by the City Council last year. So we're right at about a year of having it approved and in place. This is a roadmap for the next 30 years on how the city will manage the work that we will do and how we'll improve the environment for everyone, how we're going to help mitigate climate change. And the plan has 8 major goals, 97 action items, and 43 of these are underway right now. Now, these are major goals and major action items. And so if you want to see all 250 pages of this plan, as well as a dashboard of the progress, there's a very impressive website at dallasclimateaction.com. So with that, I also want to invite each of you to a free program that we're having next Friday. And we'll have it next year as well. And it is the North Texas Climate Change Symposium. And I'll put that link in the chat here shortly. But we're so excited because it's featuring 2 amazing speakers. And one is Shannon Carroll, and he is the Director of Global Environmental Sustainability for AT&T. And he's going to be talking about climate change within business in relationship to adaptation and mitigation. So it should be a very exciting conversation with him. And then we also will be welcoming the president of the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank. And he has many different pieces of information and thoughts regarding climate change and how that is impacting businesses and how businesses need to prepare for it. So from the economic side, from the workforce side, so just a really exciting free program. And again, I'll put that link in the chat. So with that, I want to now introduce our fabulous speaker for today. I want to welcome back Amanda Griffin. It's so exciting to have you, and thank you for joining us for part two regarding irrigation conservation components. So she was here in March and gave us an exciting talk and information about irrigation systems. Amanda is the president and CEO of Smart Outdoor Services. And I'll put the link to her company in the chat as well. Amanda holds 2 certifications in landscape irrigation from the International Irrigation Association. She is a certified irrigation contractor and a certified landscape irrigation auditor. She has done a lot of work in her years in the industry, and she's also the former secretary of the Dallas Irrigation Association. So and the former executive director of it as well. So this woman is well versed in what she's talking about. But I want to mention on a personal note that I've actually had the pleasure of seeing a landscape that Amanda's company manages and her crew maintains on a regular basis. And it's such a vibrant and impressive landscape, not just in terms of the variety of irrigation systems that are within the landscape, but also the adaptive plants that are throughout it. There were things that I had not seen before, did not realize would grow here in our area. And there's all these different rooms, I would say, within the landscape with all this beauty that arrives at different times of the year. And she's going to say more about that as well. So Amanda, just thank you so much again for being here. And I can't wait to hear the presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy. I'm so thrilled to be back, and I'm just ready to get started. I've got a lot of information to share with you guys today, so let's get going. Here's my screen. We're back for part two with a vengeance. We're going to talk a little bit more about sprinkler components today, so let's get right into it. All right, here's me. She told you all the bullet points about me, but I wanted to point out that I've used this slide so many times through the years that I updated my number of experience years since last time. So I just wanted to point that out to you guys. I have been around for almost 20 years in the green industry, advising, educating, consulting on irrigation, and my teams and I have saved millions of gallons of water in North Texas. So we're excited to continue our good works here. My company does specialize in water management. We're also expert troubleshooters in old systems and electrical field issues. And every one of our staff are certified sprinkler nerds. So I'm sure to give you a lot of nerdy data today. So in the last class, we went over the basic parts of an irrigation system. We talked about emitters and valves, and we looked at a system map to see how those interact. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how to manage your water. And if we have time, we're going to talk about how to troubleshoot your system. So this slide should look familiar to you if you were at our last class. This is just a little diagram I put together of an irrigation system. The thing about an irrigation system is most of it is underground. You don't see it. You don't, and if you've never kind of seen a sketch like this, you may not really understand how all those pieces go together. The blue circles here are the separate irrigation zones. So you may hear your landscaper call those stations, or that he may call those zones. Those are all the sprinklers that run at one time together. So this slide, we went over it pretty much in detail last time. So I'm going to move on. If anybody has any questions, we can come back to this slide and talk about the system. I want to start with electricity. This is where we ended at our last class. We talked about our, I need to get my little pointer. Where is my pointer? Where is my pointer? No, that's not it. Can you guys see my mouse? Somebody help me here.
No, I'm not seeing it.
Is it?
Oh, yeah, I do. It's up at the top of the page. There you go.
Am I circling around? Okay.
Yes, you
Is that
are.
it? Great. Okay. It just took a minute to take. Thank you. So here we've got our valves. They're in the ground. Moving out from the valve, if you remember our terminology, is our lateral line that delivers water out to the emitters in your landscape. And then remember our solid line in this schematic is our main line. That's the water that is pressurized all the time. Remember, I said if you have a lateral leak, it's a big deal. If you have a mainline leak, it's an emergency. So lateral lines, if they have a break, they will leak when that zone is running. And a main line will leak all the time and send you a really high water bill unless you have a master valve. So frequently when people call in and say, I have a leak in my sprinkler system, I'll say, is it running all the time? Is it running right now? Or did you notice it while the sprinklers were on this morning? And that will tell me if it's a lateral leak or a mainline leak. But what I want to talk to you about today is something else that goes from your controller here at your house, typically in your garage, to every single zone in your system. Every single valve in your system is also connected to your irrigation controller with electrical wire. So there is a wire, at least one wire, if not two wires, that go from your controller to every single valve in your system. There is these colored lines here indicate the zone valve. And then the dotted line in this schematic indicates the common wire. The common wire goes to every zone in your system. And we'll talk a little bit about why it's important in just a little while. But I wanted to kind of give you this map so you could see that underground where you can't see things, there's electrical wire. Now, why is this important? Because it is typically the least understood part of your system. It's not super intuitive. We've got water that comes out. We see that, it makes sense. It waters our plants, but the electrical component is just as critical. It's like comparing your vascular system and your nervous system. You can't do without either one of them. So the electrical component is really important. It consists of your controller, your wiring. There's different kinds of wire in the ground. There's multi-strand where there's one encased wire with multiple different colored wires inside. There's single strand wire, which is just an encasement with usually a pretty thicker wire that goes to every zone. That's more common in commercial applications. And then in a lot of places, especially older systems or systems that have been worked on by multiple irrigators or landscapers over the years, we'll see thermostat wire. Now, thermostat wire is exactly what it sounds like. It's wire that's intended to be used in a thermostat setting. It's very delicate. It's not rated for burial, and it causes a lot of problems in your system. So that's why on my slide, I've got thermostat. Oh my, because if you have thermostat wire, I can pretty much guarantee you're going to have a wire issue sometime or another. Now, one thing I want you to think about with wiring in your system, you don't always know where the wires are. If your system is brand new and they came in and installed it all at once, typically your wire path will follow your pipe path because they dig one trench, they put everything in there, then they put the dirt back. But if your system is ever been worked on at all, if you've ever added a zone or changed up your system to match a new landscape, or made any kind of substantial changes in your backyard, or if you don't know, the complete history of your irrigation system, you could have a wire path running anywhere through your yard. A lot of times if a wire has to be added, it's kind of, buried pretty shallow in the ground. So it's really common for a wire to get broken in a fence project, in a dog fence project, in a tree planting project, in a patio project. So I always advise my clients that if you're going to do a construction project in an area where you have irrigation, it will save you so much money to have your irrigator come out and find that in advance. Find it before it's broken in a million places. Typically, they can mark the path, or they can mark path where they can put a future junction for you. And you'll know exactly what's going to happen in the project. What more typically happens is people get excited, they get a bunch of plants and they come in and do all this fancy stuff and add a border and some rock work and a patio. And then the landscaper waves and leaves and they go to turn on the water and nothing comes on. And then it's a big mystery. And then solving that mystery usually requires some digging and some poking around in the new landscape, maybe moving some plants to get to the place. So tracing that wire path and your pipe path, or labeling the places in that area before a construction project can save you big money. I always advise doing that. It's certainly cheaper paying a service call than it is paying an unlimited number of troubleshooting hours. So the controller is what we're going to mainly talk about today. It's the brains of your system, okay? It's telling everything else in your system what to do. It's telling the valves when to turn on and when to turn off. It's shutting off in cases of rain and freeze, but it's only as smart as the person that's programming it. And I'll tell you, we work with super simple technology and super complex technology, and 9 times out of 10, a problem with a controller is operator error. So we're going to talk a little bit about scheduling today and hopefully eliminate some of those errors for you. Controllers are typically called, some people refer to them as the clock. They'll say, where's your clock for your irrigation system? Sometimes they're called a timer. That's more typical. I think up north, they refer to them as timers, and then a controller. So those terms are interchangeable. Depends on who your irrigator took his first class from, what he might call it. Now, I wanted to show this picture to you guys first, because this is what it looks like when you open your irrigation controller in your garage and you move that face panel over. Now, if you're like me, before I became an irrigator, I wouldn't have touched that with a 10-foot pole, and I wouldn't have opened that face panel for love or money, because it just seemed like a mysterious machine. I didn't know if I would get electrocuted, or if everything was delicate and I would mess something up. But I want to give you the courage to go out and take a look at your irrigation controller behind the face mask. Behind the face panel, the wizard behind the curtain, because that's where all the cool stuff happens. So I want to show you a couple of things on this controller. My arrows here. So the multicolored wires here in the bottom are your zone wires. These are the wires that go all through your yard and all the way to your zones. A lot of times you'll have extra wires in your box, your timer box, your controller box. That's great. That just means you have extra wires in the field. If you ever have a wire break, or if you need to add a zone out in the field, having that extra wire can come in real handy, because you don't have to run new wire. The yellow arrows on this sheet are ports. So normally, if this controller was connected and ready to go, these wires would be long enough to go up into one of these ports. So you'd have a wire in every port, one for every zone. So this particular controller has 7 available ports here in this first module, and then 3 zones, 3 zones, 3 zones. So this controller here could accommodate 16 irrigation zones. This box here with the red arrow on the left is your transformer. That's what takes the electricity from your house and converts it into a format that will work with your valves and your solenoids in the field. That is a part that occasionally fails and can be changed out, but controllers are typically economical enough that if something happens to your transformer, a lot of times your irrigator will just change out the controller, especially if your controller is more than about 7, 8, 9 years old. Odds are there's a controller that does a lot more cool things it's really economical for you to go ahead and upgrade, so you get some of those more advanced features that can help you save water. This wire here that I've noted, you can see it looks like it has a piece of tape on it with a C. That is a common wire. Typically, your common wire should be white. So when you look in that box, when you see a white wire, that is your common wire. The zone wires will be multicolor. Occasionally that's different because somebody had to scab onto a wire or use a field wire for a common wire. It's not that big a deal if your common is a different color, but more than likely it will be white. I want to point out to you this little loop. See that yellow loop of wire right here? That is what we call the sensor loop, okay? That is a circuit that allows your rain and freeze sensor to turn off the system when it's wet. So if you don't have a rain and freeze sensor on your system, you have to have that sensor loop or else nothing will water. If one of the pieces of that loop are out of your controller, then the controller will think that it's raining because it's on or off according to that loop. So if you have a rain freeze sensor, it will go in those ports and continue the circuit out to the rain and freeze sensor. But if you don't have one, you'll have this sensor loop. It's not uncommon for that sensor loop to get loose or get disconnected. And so someone will call me and say, nothing runs, nothing comes on. The controller seems to be working, but no water will come out. Sometimes it's that sensor loop. So that's a good thing to know about and to check. If you ever go to your controller and only one part of that sensor loop is plugged in, then stick that other wire in there or ask your irrigation professional, make sure it's supposed to be that way. Okay, let's talk about scheduling. As I said, your irrigation controller is only as smart as you are. It's only as smart as the dude putting in the schedule to water your landscape appropriately. Now, I have two little easy to remember mnemonics that I teach when we're talking about irrigation scheduling. S equals S and P equals P. I'll explain both of these in just a minute, but they are little tools to help you remember as you're building your schedule from season to season, how it needs to be laid out. All right. So when we're talking about scheduling, we are setting up a program in your controller to run zones for a particular time. At particular times of day. Those are the start times that we're looking at. And then you'll have to program the time and date into your controller. That way the controller knows what time it is, knows what day it is, knows when it can water and when it can't. We'll talk a little bit about advanced features in programming as well. So P equals P. What P equals P is programs are for plants. Most controllers have at least 4 program options. So when you think of writing a program, if you're going to write a program to run in your computer, you're going to put some commands in there, and then that program is going to do a certain thing. Works the same way with your irrigation controller. You're going to set up this program to do a certain thing at a certain time. And the way you want to set that up is according to your plant type. So you want to water your turf on a program. You want to water your bedding plants on a program. You want to water your annual color, your thirstiest plants on its own program. The reason why is because those plants all have different water needs. So if you're watering everything the same, you can overwater things or underwater things. So to build a really smart program, you want to utilize different programs for different plants. Now, they may water on the same day. They will water on the same day if you're following your City of Dallas regulations of 2 times a week, but not necessarily the same day. You may have a program that only waters one of your water days. You may have a program that you have to water both water days, but it's helpful to remember that programs are for plants. So if you have a different plant type, you can set it up on its own schedule on its own program. So most people water all the zones the same amount of time, the same number of times per week. And what that creates is wet spots and dry spots. And this issue is exacerbated because a lot of people don't have their landscape hydrozoned properly, or they don't have their irrigation laid out according to proper hydrozones. So I want to talk to you a little bit about hydrozones. This is a great graphic that I borrowed from Rainbird that shows a properly hydrozoned system. I was talking to Vanessa before the call began about hydrozones. I said it's really fun to talk about hydrozones when you're thinking about planting your garden or creating your landscape, because you can create those hydrozones appropriately. When we're talking about hydrozones in the irrigation world, we're like, oh, we've got to deal with bad hydrozones and get an irrigation system to water different plants that are in the same zone that have completely different water needs. So I like to mention hydrozones because if you get ready to do a landscaping project, you need to think about the plants, how they're going together, and what their water demands are. Now, a lot of people assume that a landscaper automatically thinks about that. That's not necessarily true, okay? The landscaper's thinking about, what did you say your favorite color was, and how many things can I get there that looks like that, and how many things can I squeeze in there so that it looks really green and mature, and how green can we make this yard? So it's never a bad idea to just ask the question. If you're planning a landscape project, ask about hydrozones. Having correct hydrozones makes your ability to write an efficient sprinkler schedule very, very easy. I keep talking about writing a smart schedule. That's not to be confused with a smart controller. A lot of what we call smart controllers either kind of create a schedule on their own based on weather conditions, or they read moisture levels in the air or in the soil and they change their schedules based on that. But you can achieve a lot of water efficiency without a smart controller if you build a smart schedule. So the smart schedule I'm talking about is the smart one in your brain, not having to do with your irrigation controller. So this is a hydrozone system. You can see these beautiful berry plants in the upper right corner have a moderate water demand. Okay, the turf in the middle has a high water demand. These shrubs over here on the side, maybe those are your native and adaptive plants, so they have a low water demand. So think about if this were your landscape and you were watering everything here the same amount of time every week, your turf is probably going to look great, and your native and adaptive plants are going to be dying and rotting at the roots. So you want to be able to water different plant types at different times. Okay, let's talk about S is for S. Start times are for soils. Let me tell you about start times. Start times are the time that your sprinkler starts. It's self-explanatory. So when that start time happens on your irrigation clock, your sprinklers come on for whatever program you've got written in that day. So the reason I say start times are for soils is because in the program setting, you're thinking about how much water do my plants need. When you're talking about start times, you need to be thinking about how much water can my soil accept in one setting, okay? So you can get a lot more usable water to your plants if you spread out your water times over multiple start times. Okay, so what that allows is time for the water to soak into the soil and break the hydrophobic barrier that is created on the surface of the soil in between watering times. Salts accumulate there, and the surface of the soil is the driest compared to the soil underneath. So it takes a little bit of water to break that hydrophobic barrier in order for that water to go down deep into the root zones where you need it for your plants. So North Texas clay, if you just have an unamended basic backyard or front yard, you probably have pretty clay soil in most areas of North Texas. There's some little fingers of some sandier soils, but more than likely you have pretty clay soil, especially in your larger turf areas where it's a lot less likely to have been amended. North Texas clay can only absorb about 5 minutes of water. I'm going to say that again for you. North Texas soils typically can only really absorb about 5 minutes of water. That seems very, very low. I know. That seems like not enough water for your plants. I know. But if you're thinking about start times, you want to spread that water out so that it has time to go down into the soil. And let me tell it to you sort of in another way. If you're watering more than 5 minutes of water with a spray head, after 5 minutes, that water is probably mostly wasted. It's puddling in low-lying areas. It's evaporating off the sidewalk. So my advice is to use the 5-minute rule of thumb. Okay. Now, if you have flower beds that have been heavily amended with expanded shale or, other materials to make the soil less clay, they may drain faster and you can water those a little bit longer. But the important thing to remember is that you can have multiple start times so that you can give the plants the number of minutes they need without overwatering at any one time. That is probably the most common mistake that homeowners make when they're building their schedule, is they program all their minutes in one shot, and then they think they're not getting enough water, when more than likely they're putting enough water down. It's just not being put down in the schedule that makes it the most usable for the plant. So if that water is not usable for the plant, you may as well just turn on your bathtub and leave it running while you go to work. It's just a waste. So you may need in the summertime 3 or 4 start times. I'm going to talk to you about how to set that up in just a few minutes. But so decide on how many minutes you need, and then you're going to divide that up by the number of start times you need, and then you're going to be able to put a good schedule together. So think about a sponge. When a sponge is dry and kind of shriveled, when it hasn't been used in a while, when you first put those first few drops of water on there, they just sit there on the surface of the soil. They don't really soak in. They're just there. They can run off the sponge really easily. Then once you apply more water, then that sponge begins to soak up the water down into its surface. That's really a great analogy for the hydrophobic barrier. That sponge has a hydrophobic barrier, the same as your soil gets. So we want to break that and then water. Here's a nice illustration of soil types. You've got clay soil, which when you apply water to clay soil, it absorbs very slowly. So it's more likely to move laterally. Okay, when the middle picture is loamy soil, that water is going to kind of have sort of an equal horizontal and vertical movement. And in sand, the particles in sand are so large, there's so much airspace in between those particles that water tends to move faster vertically than it does horizontally. So when you're thinking about what kind of soils you have and how much water you want to put down, you need to think about your soil types so that you can match your precipitation rate with the absorption rate of your soil. So let's look at an example of a schedule, and I'm going to show you how this will work. Okay, so it's a tale of two schedules. So let's look at the first schedule. This is a very typical, I could walk down any street in Dallas and look at all the schedules of all the houses, and I would say that 7 to 8 of the houses out of 10 will have almost every zone running 20 minutes or 15 minutes, all the zones. It doesn't matter if they have rotors or sprays. It doesn't matter if they have clay soil or amended soil. This is just a typical water time. They've programmed 20 minutes of water with 1 start time. Well, if your soil can't absorb more than 5 minutes of water, what happens is you get 5 minutes of usable water applied to that very top layer of soil, and then 15 more minutes of water. And what's happening to that water? It's running off. It's going to the lowest place in your yard. It's puddling up. It'll soak in eventually, but it's certainly not soaking in with an even application that your sprinklers intend for that water to be distributed with. So we're looking at 5 minutes of really usable water that goes down deep into that root zone for the plant, and basically 15 minutes of waste. Okay. Now, alternatively, if we built this with a smart start time schedule, we can actually reduce our run times, but increase our usable water for the plant. Okay, so instead of watering 20 minutes on one start time at 6 a.m., we water everything for 20 minutes. Instead, we're going to set it up with a 5-minute run time for 3 start times. Okay, so at 6 a.m., it's going to run for 5 minutes. At 6:45, it's going to run for 5 minutes. At 7:15, it's going to run for 5 minutes. And then, then you can honor your water window, because we don't want to water after 10 a.m., but you've applied 15 minutes of water. That's less water than you applied before. But listen to the magic. This is what happens. That first 5 minutes breaks that hydrophobic barrier, that hydrophobic layer. It begins to soak into the soil. Okay, you give it time to absorb. You wait. I put a 10 to 30 minute break. You typically don't have to calculate how long your break is if you schedule your start times back to back, because what happens is your controller waters zone 1 for 5 minutes, then it goes on to zone 2 for 5 minutes, then it goes on to zone 3, maybe that's drip, maybe it runs for 15 minutes, then it moves on to zone 4 and it runs some rotors, so maybe it runs 10 minutes on rotors. What that is your soaking time for zone 1 while the rest of these zones are going. Okay, so I set up that first start time 6 a.m. If I have, for easy math, let's say I have 5 zones. Okay, so I'm going to water my system for 25 minutes and then I'm going to be done. 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes times 6. Times how many zones did I say we had? I said we had 6 zones. That's half an hour, 30 minutes. So we've got 5 minutes, 6 zones, 30 minutes of water. We're done. I can start that very next start time at 6:30. It can go back to zone 1, run 5 more minutes on everything. Now we've got 10 minutes of water. This is where the magic starts to happen. The hydrophobic layer is broken in that first 5 minutes. And when the second 5 minutes of water gets laid down, that water gets to sort of use the highway that the first 5 minutes of water created for it, and it pushes deeper. It absorbs faster because that hydrophobic layer is broken, and it can go a little deeper, and it also pushes that first 5 minutes of water deeper into the soil. So you're getting a more vertical water table in your soil with that second 5 minutes of water. It's pushing through. Your third 5 minutes, you're filling up those air spaces within your soil profile with that last 5 minutes of water. So it's all there. Your plant is just able to gorge on that water in that zone, that root zone, because you've got usable water to the plant. You've got less water running off. You've got less puddling because the water gets applied to the place where it's supposed to go, and it gets to absorb in that place. It doesn't have time to pool together with its water molecule buddies and roll down the hill to your lowest space. So in this example, not only have we cut back our water bill by 25%, we've eliminated 5 whole minutes of water for our zones, but we've tripled the amount of usable water that's available to our plant. When you start using good start time scheduling, you'll probably find that you can also even cut back your schedule. So not only will you not need 20 minutes of water anymore, but you probably won't need 15 minutes of water anymore. You might cut those run times back to 4 minutes times 3 start times, or you might do 2 start times of 5 minutes and just need 10 minutes. So there's a little bit of monitoring that's needed when you set up your start times together. And I would love to be able to tell you to just put this schedule in, here it is, this is what you need, pay no attention to this thing until October. But unfortunately, if you want to have a smart sprinkler and you want to really be maximize your efficiency in your watering, the best way to do that is to pay attention. And there's no easier way to do it. Pay attention, or hire an irrigation professional or landscape professional that's going to pay attention for you. I'm going to repeat some advice that I gave you guys last time, that don't assume that your landscape maintenance contractor is monitoring your water use for you. That is the most common misconception that homeowners have. Well, my mower guy sets my schedule. I don't know what my schedule is. My guy that comes once a week to mow, he makes sure that the schedule is correct. That's not happening. I can almost promise you, unless you have a conscientious, water efficient landscape manager who is concerned about water, if they see a problem in the landscape, they're going to turn up those minutes. So you want to pay attention and be sure that you're watering the least amount of possible with the maximum amount of effect. So in this tale of two schedules, this second schedule is a lot more smart. Now let's talk about some factors to consider. I'm giving you the 5-minute rule of thumb, but a lot of things can affect that, okay? A lot of things that are already existing in your system, they might be problems, they might just be things. It might not really be a problem, but they're just factors to consider. If you have really high pressure on your sprinkler system, that is the biggest water waster that I see, is excessive pressure. First of all of your irrigation components are designed and manufactured to run within a limited pressure range. They run really good from this many gallons a minute to this many gallons a minute. They run really good at that little range. Once you get beyond the range with excessive pressure, several things happen. Number one, you're flowing exponentially more water through your line, okay? It's not just like, oh, 1 more gallon, 2 more gallons. It's like 4 more gallons, 8 more gallons. The other thing that happens is the size of your water drops coming out of your emitter they're moving faster, and they're moving through that nozzle faster, and so they're smaller. When those water droplets are smaller, they're more likely to be blown away in the wind. They're more than likely to not make it to the area of your landscape that they're supposed to be landing on. Okay, so increased pressure is a big problem. It's a big problem in North Texas, not just in Dallas, but every town in North Texas, and it's a problem born out of necessity. The city's got to have enough pressure to get water from the water tower to the farthest yard, way far away in that service area. So at certain times of the year when there's a lot of water demand, those mainline pressures have to increase accordingly. So, that's not a mistake by the city. It's not a problem that they're not addressing or anything like that. It's just the nature of a water system. So if you can control how much pressure arrives at your property, you can write a much more efficient system. There are pressure regulating heads that you can retrofit on your system. You can adjust the pressure slightly by adjusting your zone valves. You can also put a mainline pressure regulator or pressure reducer on your system so that you know exactly what the pressure is coming out into the rest of your system. So if you know that you have high pressure, it was probably worth a service call to have an irrigation professional out to give you some options on reducing your pressure, because it can be big water savings. We retrofit a homeowners association in North Texas with pressure regulated rotors. Okay, so we took out the rotors that were there and we put pressure regulated rotors in their place. We took some pre-flow and pressure readings. We took some post flow and pressure readings. The savings was about 34% pressure regulated head to post pressure regulated head. So just by switching those heads around, we decrease the pressure so much that those zones were running 34% less water in the same amount of time. So I didn't have to adjust the schedule. I didn't have to do anything but retrofit those heads, and miraculously that system was using 34% less water. So it's substantial. If you think about what your water bill costs in your highest water month, July or August, take 34% of that. That's what you could be saving. It's the greatest opportunity for water savings, in my opinion, in North Texas, is with pressure management. Soil health also affects this. If you have really compacted soil, it's going to absorb water even more slowly than the 5-minute thumb rule. Rule of thumb. The structure of the soil is so important to think about when you're writing that irrigation schedule. Pay attention to your soil quality. If it's super compacted, it might be worth the investment to amend that soil or aerate that soil or do something about that compacted soil in order to create those air spaces in the soil where the water can absorb into. Also, if you have lawn that has been chemically treated too much, then it's also going to absorb water. It's not going to hold water as well as a healthy soil. There's fewer organisms in that soil to help create the environment that allows the soil to retain water over time. And it's going to be more of a sterile soil situation. So I am a big proponent of not chemically treating your lawns. I know a lot of people don't have the option or think they don't have the option, but if you can wean your lawn off of chemicals over time, you'll use less water, you'll have a healthier lawn, you'll have more microorganisms in your soil to add to the health of your plants, and runoff from your property will have fewer chemicals that go into the stormwater system that the city of Dallas has to remediate. The chemicals within your just general environment will be reduced. So I'll get off that soapbox, but we also have to consider how efficient is your irrigation system design-wise. Are there heads in all the right places? Do you have a space where a head really should be, but it's not? Maybe the head was there years ago and somebody capped it off instead of repairing it. You have to water to your dry spots, unfortunately. So if you have some design inefficiencies, you have to water all of this part of your yard too much in order to get this little piece just wet enough to survive. So if you have some design inefficiencies, it might be worth a small irrigation renovation in that particular zone. Move some heads around, create a more efficient design. That way you can build a really aggressive water conserving schedule. The last factor that I want to talk about is deflection. Deflection is when a plant gets mature and grows up in the way of a sprinkler. Okay, I say water is not a ninja. It can't jump around that Nandina to water that flower on the other side of the Nandina. If I could only make water a ninja, I wouldn't be talking to you today. I would be a gazillionaire living somewhere else. But it's not a ninja. So we've got to take deflection into account when we're thinking about our schedules, because if we've got a lot of deflection and that sprinkler is going to water and it's just going to hit this shrub and run down, you're going to have a wet spot right here, and the plants on the other side of that plant are not going to get watered enough. So then you're going to go, well, this is dry. I better water more. So you turn the water up. You get still dry over here, and this guy's drowning in the back. So deflection needs to be addressed. There's some different ways to do that. I recommend taking the emitter below instead of raising the emitter up. In some cases, you have to put a riser so that you lift up that water so it sprays over. But think about where the plant needs the water. Does it need it on the top of its canopy or where its leaves are? No, it needs the water on the soil level. So a lot of times if we see deflection in a landscape, we'll actually lower that head down so that it can water underneath the canopy of that Nandina or that Yaupon, so that more water can get farther out in the intended range. Sometimes you can't do anything about deflection without removing the plants, and most of the time you don't want to do that. So you may have to move ahead, over 2 or 3 inches or over 6 inches, or add a head to the front to get those plants. There's a misconception that more heads is going to automatically mean more water, or fewer zones is going to mean that you're going to use less water. Those are backwards, and let me tell you why. If you have more heads, you're applying water everywhere. You can usually water fewer minutes. If you have one head way over here and he's got to water all this stuff, then you're going to have to overwater some areas to get those far-reaching areas wet enough. Same thing with the zones. If you have 4 zones, you're watering a lot of plants the same. Everything in those 4 zones gets watered the same amount of time. If you have 12 zones or 8 zones, you can water these plants what they need, these plants what they need, times 8 or times 12. So more zones actually gives you more precise control of your water and can actually allow you to water more efficiently in all of the areas. Because what I like to set my clients up for is, if they've got 1 or 2 zones of really thirsty plants that they really love, they're just really beautiful, let's water those. Water them as much as we want, but water them as much as they need. But the other areas of the yard, we can water less. They don't need as much water. They don't have those high water needs. So if you are thinking about overall an efficient system, you don't necessarily have to have all cactus and desert plants. You can hydrozone properly and have those 1 or 2 zones that have to water more than maybe you feel like you should, or maybe you feel like you want to, and you can make it up with those other 8 or 9 zones on your system and water those just what they need as well. Then you can feel less guilty about having 1 zone of thirsty plants when you're making it up on the other side. So you might have a reason to put a zone on multiple programs, and that's okay. The main thing about building a smart schedule is watering for the plant at the right time, for what that plant needs, for what your soil can accept. So it's okay to put a zone on multiple programs as long as it really needs it, okay? Coverage is an issue. We talked a little bit about that. If you have some coverage issues, it pays to get those taken care of, because you'll be able to water that whole zone for fewer minutes than you have to now. Microclimates is something else that you can really take into account. If you have a pool or a big hardscape, it's going to create heat. It's going to not create heat. It's going to absorb heat from the environment. And so it's going to be warmer there. It's going to be hot. That's why in the summertime, you'll see a rotor that goes a little bit over the grass and just touches the sidewalk. We need it to do that because that sidewalk is really hot. If you don't account for those microclimates, those little areas that are just warmer than they should be, or maybe they're cooler than they should be because of some thing in your yard, you've got a deep shade, you got a big mature tree that cools everything off in that area. You have to account for that when you're building your schedule. I have one more note here. This D program usually runs concurrently. So on your irrigation controller, typically the D program is considered for drip. So you can program those zones a lot longer because they'll run at the same time your other zones are happening. So that's just something to think about when you're building your schedule. If you have a zone that needs to run a long time, put it on program D because it can overlap with those other programs. So your zone run times depends on your plant. It depends on your soil type. It depends on all those things we've been talking about. So the city of Dallas requires twice a week water, limits you to twice a week watering. And I get questions all the time. Can my landscape really live on 2 days a week? Short answer, yes. moving on. No, just kidding. Yes, it can. But again, it can't if you just set it and forget it and don't pay attention to what's happening, or have someone, a professional, that's paying attention to what's happening. Absolutely, your landscape can live on twice a week watering. It should live on twice a week watering. A lot of landscape doesn't even need twice a week watering. So build those schedules to maximize the watering in those 2 days a week. Set early in the day start times, set late in the day start times. I do want to say, I know I'm running out of time, but I do want to say one thing about start times. You want to put them back to back or close enough together to take advantage of that hydrophobic barrier being broken. You don't want to put a start time at 6 a.m. and then a start time at 8 p.m. You've got over 12 hours there that you've just created another hydrophobic barrier. So if you really want to send water vertical, send water deep, put those start times closer together. Your watering window is not between 10 and 6. Most controllers, you can tell it that. You can say, don't water after 10. You can start watering after 6. And of course, your drip, soaker hoses, and hand watering are exempt in most situations. And I would encourage hand watering, because getting out in your landscape, watering things and paying attention to what they are doing and where they are in their growth cycle will really help you build a smarter schedule and adjust those schedules back as much as you can. Okay, I am to my stopping point. Oh, I'll leave this slide up at the end. If you're still confused and you're like, I still don't know how much to water, here's a couple of great resources for you to check out. They give regular updates based on your zip code. Water My Yard will send you an alert and say, hey, today's a day you should water, or don't bother. You don't need to water today.
All right. Amanda, thank you. That was terrific. We do have a question, and I want to just jump right in and get to it. There was a question about, is there a difference from watering in the day or the night? And I know that there are some requirements within each city about not watering during the heat of the day, but just talk about that for a second.
Sure. So my thoughts on watering day versus night. Typically, we're so warm in North Texas that you can water at night in the warm months. So there's some different views on this. So one of the challenges is if you water at night in the winter, it's usually really cold. You're more likely to get a freeze situation. So you don't want to do that. But in the summer, as long as you're not overwatering, it's okay to water at night. There's less evaporation, obviously, going on at night, and it will extend your water window. So if you need a lot more minutes to water, you can start when it's still dark and water through until 10, and then have a start time at 6 or 7 o'clock and water into the night. And it's usually fine. I think fungus problems get blamed on watering at night sometimes, which can happen. I'm not saying they don't, but I think fungus is caused by more issues than just watering at night. It's usually too many chemicals and not enough organisms in your soil to keep the fungus at bay, in my opinion. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. You know, I learned from you last year during the WaterWise Landscape Tour about the 5-minute watering approach. And I have a big front yard in particular. And I just want to say, to tell everybody who's still on with us, that actually twice a week works great. And I have a really big front lawn. And right now, for example, on our street, we have one of the greenest lawns. All my neighbors around me still have brown. And I'm just wondering, did that 5-minute approach actually help strengthen the roots and maybe help my grass? Because I'm just amazed how much greener. I mean, I've had the neighbors even say, what are you doing? Your lawn looks amazing already.
Absolutely. Using that 5-minute approach pushes that water deeper, and the roots chase the water. So if you're watering deeper vertically, then the roots are going down vertically. That makes them more resilient. Another thing that you might be doing is leaving your leaf blade a little longer than some of your neighbors. If you cut that leaf blade short over and over and over, it stunts the root length. So leaf blade is correlated with root length. So that's another way to make your grass healthy and resilient. But absolutely, proper watering builds a more resilient plant.
Wow, that's great. And I just wanted to say that the freeze that we've just had, I noticed that quite a few shrubs in particular have suffered and seem like they've died. Is there a kind of a window of time to wait before people pull them out, just to see if they are able to recover and rejuvenate now with the warmth of the spring and the watering? Or is it,
Yes, there.
do we wait another
Well,
month,
there's
or, you know, what would you say?
right. There's some debate about that. You know, in general, spring has sprung. So if you're not seeing any green growth from the soil level of that shrub, and the top branches are crispy and break off really easily, then that shrub could very well be dead. If you're just want to hold out hope, then you know most shrubs you can cut them back, you know, to the ground really low, and they might spring back. But I think we're getting pretty close to the point where if it hasn't started springing back, it might be dead. I'm not the best person to ask that. I would definitely consult your landscape professional. But most of the articles that I've read have said, you know, don't cut those shrubs out too soon. But, you know, it's been a month now. And so those articles were talking about a month ago. So it now, if nothing is springing back and there's no greenness, there's no flexibility in any of those shrubs, then they're probably a goner, unfortunately.
All right. Okay. Well, I was afraid you were going to say that. Well, thank you so much. I know we're out of time. And so I want to thank you for being here for part 2. We hope to have you back in the future. And I want to thank the Dallas Library, as always, for being here and for all the technology, and everyone who joined us today. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks everybody for coming.